The verdict was delivered without ceremony. Ambassador Helena Vasquez stood in the center of the Galactic Conclave's grand chamber, surrounded by the representatives of 412 spacefaring civilizations. The chamber itself was a marvel of engineering, a crystalline dome suspended in orbit around Nexus Prime, the artificial world that served as the political heart of the Milky Way. Light from a dozen nearby stars refracted through the structure, casting prismatic shadows across the assembled delegates. Helena had known this moment was coming. She had seen it in the cold calculation of the Vorthak's compound eyes, in the dismissive flutter of the Selenari's luminescent wings, in the way the ancient Kethra had refused to acknowledge her presence during the preliminary hearings. Humanity had made too many enemies, too quickly. "The vote has been tallied," announced High Arbiter Zolvex, his serpentine body coiling around the central podium. His scales shimmered with bioluminescent patterns that translated his words into 100 different languages simultaneously. By a margin of 387 to 25, the Galactic Conclave has determined that the species known as humans, originating from the planet designated Sol 3, are hereby declared a Class 7 threat to galactic stability. Helena's hands trembled, but she kept her voice steady. "High Arbiter, I respectfully request the opportunity to respond to these accusations." Zolvex's vertical pupils contracted. "Ambassador Vasquez, you have been granted no such privilege. The evidence has been presented and evaluated. Your species' expansion rate exceeds sustainable parameters by 300%. Your population growth remains unchecked despite repeated warnings. Your technological development follows an exponential curve that our predictive algorithms cannot model. Most concerning of all, your kind has demonstrated a pattern of behavior that our xenopsychologists have classified as aggressive adaptability." "We call it survival," Helena said quietly. "You call it many things," Zolvex continued, ignoring her. "Ambition, progress, destiny. We have observed 63,000 sentient species rise and fall in this galaxy over the past 2 billion years. We have seen the patterns. We know how this ends." The Vorthak representative rose from his delegation's alcove, his chitinous form clicking with barely contained hostility. The humans arrived in this galaxy's political sphere less than 3 standard centuries ago. In that time, they have colonized 417 worlds, established trade networks that have disrupted 15 regional economies, developed weapons technologies that rival civilizations 10,000 years their senior, and bred like the vermin they are. Helena felt the anger rising in her chest, but she forced it down. Losing control now would only confirm their fears. "We have also contributed medical advances that have cured diseases across a dozen systems. We have developed agricultural techniques that have ended famines on worlds that had suffered for millennia. We have—" "You have done what every invasive species does," interrupted the Selenari delegate, her voice like wind chimes in a storm. "You have consumed resources, displaced native populations, and spread across habitats that were not meant for you. The fact that you occasionally leave something beneficial in your wake does not change what you fundamentally are." Helena looked around the chamber, searching for any sign of support. The Thalian delegation, one of the few species that had voted in humanity's favor, refused to meet her eyes. The Meridax, who had traded peacefully with human colonies for nearly a century, suddenly found their information displays fascinating. Even the Quorath, who had fought alongside human soldiers in the Nebula Wars, remained silent. "What is the sentence?" Helena asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Zolvex's patterns shifted to a color she had never seen before, something between contempt and pity. "Humanity is hereby exiled from the Milky Way galaxy. You will be given 1 standard year to consolidate your population and resources. After that time, you will depart for the intergalactic void. Any human vessel or individual remaining within galactic boundaries after the exile period will be subject to immediate termination." The words hit Helena like a physical blow. The intergalactic void. The vast emptiness between galaxies, where the nearest star was millions of light years away, where there were no resources, no habitable worlds, no hope. "You're sentencing us to death," she said. "We are giving you a chance," Zolvex replied. "More than you would give us if our positions were reversed. Our models are clear, Ambassador. If humanity is allowed to remain in this galaxy, within 10,000 years, you will have consumed or conquered every other civilization. We cannot allow that future to occur." Helena's mind raced through possibilities. Appeal to reason? They had already decided that humans were beyond reason. Appeal to morality? These species had moral frameworks so alien that concepts like mercy and compassion didn't translate. Appeal to self-interest? They had already calculated that their self-interest lay in humanity's removal. There was nothing left to say. "I understand," Helena said finally. "I will relay the Conclave's decision to Earth." As she turned to leave, Zolvex called out one final statement. "Ambassador Vasquez, your species' probability of survival in the void is calculated at 0.003%. I tell you this not to cause despair, but to offer perspective. Perhaps, in the silence between the stars, you will finally learn the peace that eluded you here." Helena paused at the chamber's exit. She looked back at the assembled representatives of 412 civilizations, species that had conquered the secrets of faster-than-light travel, mastered the manipulation of matter at the quantum level, and built empires that spanned thousands of star systems. "You've studied 63,000 species," she said, "but you've never studied anything like us. And when we return, because we will return, you'll finally understand why." She stepped through the doorway and didn't look back. Part 2. The Exodus. The Year of Gathering, as it came to be known, was the most remarkable mobilization in human history. Every colony, every outpost, every deep space station received the message simultaneously. The wording was simple, crafted by the greatest minds in human psychology to convey urgency without panic. "Come home. Bring everything. Time is short." Admiral Marcus Chen stood on the observation deck of the Prometheus, humanity's largest carrier vessel, watching the last of the evacuation fleet assemble. Behind him, a holographic display showed the real-time positions of every human vessel in the galaxy, nearly 2 million ships, ranging from massive colony transports to single-person mining shuttles. "Final count?" he asked. Commander Sarah Okafor checked her datapad. 31,400,000,000 and approximately 600,000 souls, Admiral. We've accounted for everyone. Everyone except the ones who chose to stay. Sarah's expression tightened. They made their choice. We can't force them. Marcus nodded. Approximately 200,000 humans had refused the Exodus, choosing instead to remain on alien worlds where they had built lives among other species. The Conclave had agreed to grant these individuals asylum, provided they submitted to genetic modification that would render them sterile. The final generation of humans in the Milky Way would live out their lives peacefully, then fade into history. Most of the galaxy expected the Exodus fleet to suffer the same fate, just more quickly. "The Conclave's escort fleet is in position," Sarah reported. 300 warships. They'll accompany us to the galactic boundary. To make sure we actually leave. That's the official story. Unofficially, I think they want to watch us die. Marcus turned away from the viewport. Then let's disappoint them. The fleet departed from human space on the anniversary of Earth's first successful faster-than-light jump. It was a deliberately chosen date, a reminder of how far humanity had come in just 3 centuries. The ships moved in formation, each one carrying not just passengers, but the entire accumulated knowledge and culture of human civilization. Libraries, museums, laboratories, everything that could be preserved had been digitized, duplicated, and distributed across the fleet. If even one ship survived, humanity's legacy would survive with it. The Conclave escort maintained a respectful distance, their weapon systems conspicuously active. They didn't speak to the human vessels, didn't acknowledge the countless messages of farewell and reconciliation that desperate humans broadcast across all frequencies. They simply watched, silent and patient, waiting for the moment when humanity would pass beyond the galaxy's edge and cease to be their concern. It took 3 months to reach the boundary. The intergalactic void greeted them with absolute darkness. Beyond the last stars of the Milky Way, there was nothing but empty space stretching for millions of light years in every direction. No planets, no asteroids, no resources of any kind. Just vacuum, cold and infinite. Admiral Chen stood on the bridge of the Prometheus as the last Conclave warship turned back toward the galaxy. Before it departed, a message arrived. Text only, no video or audio. "May your extinction be swift and painless." Chen deleted the message and turned to address his crew. "All ships, this is Admiral Chen. As of this moment, we are no longer citizens of the Milky Way galaxy. We have been cast out by species who believe they know our destiny. They believe we will die here, in the darkness between the stars. They believe that humanity's story ends today." He paused, letting his words sink in across the fleet. They're wrong. Humanity didn't become a spacefaring civilization by accepting what others believed was possible. We didn't cure diseases by accepting that death was inevitable. We didn't reach for the stars by accepting that Earth was enough. We have never, not once in our entire history, accepted the limits others tried to impose on us, and we're not going to start now. The bridge crew watched him with expressions ranging from fear to desperate hope. The Conclave thinks the void is empty. They're wrong about that too. Our scientists have identified a destination, the Andromeda Galaxy. It's 2.5 million light-years away. At our current maximum velocity, the journey will take approximately 10,000 years. He heard the gasps, saw the horror on their faces. 10,000 years. Generations upon generations would live and die aboard these ships, never knowing anything but the endless dark. "I won't pretend this will be easy," Chen continued, "but I will make you a promise. We will survive. We will adapt. We will grow. And when we finally reach Andromeda, we will build something greater than anything we left behind. The species that exiled us will continue their stagnant existence, bound by their fear of change. But we will evolve. We will become something they cannot imagine." He straightened his uniform and looked directly into the camera that broadcast his image to every ship in the fleet. Humanity doesn't surrender. Humanity doesn't die. And humanity, sure as hell, doesn't forget. Set course for Andromeda, maximum velocity. And may whatever gods we still believe in have mercy on anyone who tries to stop us. The fleet adjusted its heading and accelerated into the darkness. Part 3. The Void. The first 1,000 years were the hardest. Resources that had seemed abundant at the start of the journey dwindled with terrifying speed. Ships designed for decades of operation began to fail after centuries. Accidents, malfunctions, and diseases claimed lives by the millions. But humanity adapted. They learned to recycle everything. Every atom of matter became precious. Every joule of energy carefully rationed. Ship after ship was stripped down and absorbed into the remaining fleet. Their crews consolidated into larger vessels better suited for the long journey. The 2 million ships that had left the Milky Way dwindled to 500,000, then 100,000, then fewer still. Generation ships became the norm. Children were born in the void, lived their entire lives in the void, and died in the void. They learned the stories of Earth and Mars and the colony worlds from their parents and grandparents, but these places became myths to them, fantastical realms that existed only in old recordings and older memories.
But they also learned to innovate.
Dr. Yuki Tanaka, born 3 centuries into the journey, developed the first practical matter synthesizer. Working from ancient theoretical physics and desperate experimentation, she discovered how to convert pure energy into basic elements. The process was hideously inefficient at first. It took the output of 3 fusion reactors to produce a single kilogram of hydrogen. But it meant the fleet would never completely run out of resources. Her grandchildren refined the process. Their grandchildren refined it further. By the year 2000 of the Exodus, a single reactor could produce enough matter to sustain a small colony indefinitely. Admiral Chen died in the 4th century, but his descendants continued to lead. The Chen family became something like royalty in the void, though they carefully rejected any formal title beyond admiral. They understood that humanity needed symbols to hold on to, traditions to give meaning to their existence, and hope for the future. The hope was the hardest part. In the year 3000, the fleet encountered something impossible, a rogue planet, drifting alone in the intergalactic void. It was a frozen ball of iron and ice, completely uninhabitable by any normal standards. But to the fleet, it was a gold mine. Mining operations stripped the planet to its core over the next 2 centuries. The raw materials allowed the construction of new ships, the first new vessels built since the Exodus began. These ships incorporated 3,000 years of innovations developed in the void, technologies refined by necessity and desperation. The new generation of ships was faster, much faster. They also made another discovery on the rogue planet, traces of an ancient civilization. Ruins buried beneath the ice, technology so old it had been corroding for billions of years before humanity ever existed. The artifacts were mostly useless, their purpose impossible to determine, but one device still functioned after all that time. It was a star drive. Not like the faster-than-light engines humanity had developed, which bent space in crude approximations of natural phenomena. This was something different, something that seemed to step outside of space-time entirely, allowing travel without travel, movement without motion. It took another 500 years to reverse engineer the technology, another 200 to scale it up. But by the year 5000 of the Exodus, humanity had access to a propulsion system that exceeded anything the Milky Way civilizations had developed by a factor of 10,000. The journey to Andromeda, which had been projected to take 10,000 years, would now take less than 50. But by then, humanity had changed. 5,000 years of selection pressure in the harshest environment imaginable had transformed the species. The weak died. The careless died. The stupid died. Those who survived and reproduced were the strongest, the most adaptable, the most intelligent examples of human genetics. Genetic engineering, which had been controversial in the Milky Way era, became essential for survival in the void. Enhanced immune systems, improved radiation resistance, extended lifespans, increased cognitive capacity, each generation made improvements on the last. By the year 5000, the average human could run calculations that would have required a supercomputer in the old days. They could survive in vacuum for minutes without protection. They could see spectrums of light invisible to their ancestors. They were still human. They still felt love and hate, hope and fear, joy and sorrow. But they were also something more. Something that their exilers had feared might someday emerge, and something that their exilers had ironically guaranteed would emerge by casting them into the crucible of the void. Dr. James Wright, the leading historian of the voyage, spent his 300-year lifespan documenting the transformation. In his final entry, written as Andromeda grew from a smear of light to a visible spiral in the viewports, he summarized what humanity had become. We entered the void as refugees. We crossed the void as survivors. We emerged from the void as something our ancestors could never have imagined. The Milky Way exiled us because they feared what we might become. They were right to be afraid, but not for the reasons they imagined. We are not conquerors. We are not destroyers. We are humanity, the species that cannot be broken, only refined. And we are finally coming home. Part 4. Andromeda. The Andromeda Galaxy was not empty. Humanity had known this, of course. Their telescopes and sensors had detected signs of artificial structures from millions of light years away. But the scale of what they found upon arrival exceeded all expectations. The galaxy was home to over 2,000 spacefaring civilizations, organized into a political structure that called itself the Andromedan Communion. Unlike the Milky Way's conclave, which was a loose confederation of independent species, the Communion was a true government, a unified body that had been managing the galaxy's affairs for nearly 1 billion years. When humanity's fleet emerged from the void, the Communion's response was immediate. A delegation of 12 ships met them at the galaxy's edge. The vessels were enormous, each one larger than the Prometheus had been before its components were cannibalized for parts. They bristled with weapon systems that humanity's enhanced minds immediately began analyzing and cataloging. The lead ship hailed them in a frequency that corresponded to standard galactic communication protocols. Evidently, the physics of radio waves was consistent across galaxies. Unidentified vessels, you have entered the territory of the Andromedan Communion. State your species of origin, your purpose, and your authority for transit. Admiral Yuki Chen, direct descendant of Marcus Chen and current leader of the fleet, personally handled the response. She had prepared for this moment her entire life. We are humanity, formerly of the Milky Way galaxy. We were exiled from our home 5,000 years ago by the civilizations who feared our potential. We have crossed the intergalactic void and arrived in Andromeda seeking a new home. We come in peace, but we are prepared to defend ourselves if necessary. There was a long pause. Then a different voice responded, deeper, older, with harmonics that suggested a truly alien vocal apparatus. Humanity, we have heard of you. Yuki's heart rate increased slightly, though her enhanced physiology kept her external appearance perfectly calm. You have? The Milky Way and Andromeda maintain limited contact. Information exchanges occur at irregular intervals. The most recent exchange included data about a species called humanity that had been exiled for aggressive expansion and unpredictable development. That is accurate from a certain perspective. The data also indicated that this species had a probability of survival in the intergalactic void of 0.003%. Yet here you are, with a fleet that our sensors indicate contains approximately 4 billion individuals. We've had a productive few millennia. Another pause. When the voice returned, it carried a note of something that might have been amusement. We have been managing this galaxy for 900 million of your years. In that time, 17 different species have attempted to colonize Andromeda from external galaxies. All 17 were deemed threats and eliminated. Yuki felt the weight of 4 billion lives pressing down on her shoulders. They had come so far. They had survived so much. And now, at the end of their journey, they faced extinction once again. I understand, she said carefully. What factors determine whether a species is considered a threat? Many factors. Technological capability, population growth patterns, resource consumption rates, psychological profiles, cultural adaptability. And if we were evaluated by these factors, you would fail every single one. Your technology has advanced beyond any species we have previously encountered. Your population growth, even during your journey through the void, has been geometric. Your resource efficiency is impressive, but your consumption potential is astronomical. Your psychological profile indicates extreme adaptability combined with equally extreme aggression when threatened. And your cultural adaptability is perhaps the most concerning factor of all. Your species has demonstrated an ability to fundamentally transform itself over mere millennia, a timescale that most civilizations measure only as a margin of error in historical records. Yuki closed her eyes. They had been evaluated and found wanting, just as they had been in the Milky Way. History was repeating itself. However, the voice continued, we are not the Milky Way conclave. Yuki's eyes snapped open. Explain. The civilizations of the Milky Way saw your potential as a threat to be eliminated. They calculated the odds of your survival and chose to bet against you. They lost that bet rather spectacularly. We, on the other hand, see your potential as something else entirely. And what is that? The response came after a pause so long that Yuki began to wonder if the communication had been severed. An opportunity. The Andromedan Communion offered humanity something the Milky Way never had: genuine respect. They did not fear humanity's growth. They wanted to understand it. They did not seek to limit humanity's potential. They wanted to learn from it. The oldest civilizations of Andromeda had reached a plateau millions of years ago. Their technology had stopped advancing. Their populations had stabilized. Their cultures had ossified into comfortable stagnation. Humanity represented change. And after a billion years of sameness, change was exactly what Andromeda needed. The Communion granted humanity a region of space in the galaxy's outer rim, 100 star systems, enough room to grow for thousands of years. In exchange, humanity agreed to share its technologies, its innovations, its unique perspective on the universe. It was not subjugation. It was not exploitation. It was partnership. For the next 5,000 years, humanity flourished in Andromeda. The population exploded from 4 billion to 400 billion, spreading across thousands of worlds. The technologies developed in the void were refined and expanded, shared freely with the communion's member species. In return, humanity gained access to technologies and knowledge accumulated over nearly 1 billion years. The synthesis was transformative for both sides. Andromedan medicine, combined with human genetic engineering, created treatments for diseases that had plagued the galaxy for millions of years. Human manufacturing techniques, combined with Andromedan material science, produced construction methods that revolutionized infrastructure across the communion. Human art, music, and literature, preserved across the long journey through the void, introduced new concepts of creativity that inspired alien artists who had grown stale over the eons. But humanity also learned. They learned patience from species that measured their lives in geological epochs. They learned harmony from species that had eliminated conflict so long ago they had no word for war. They learned humility from species that had seen stars born and die by the billions. The aggressive, expansionist humanity that had frightened the Milky Way still existed, buried deep in their genes. But it was tempered now by wisdom, balanced by experience, integrated into a broader perspective that encompassed more than just survival. Humanity had become what it was always meant to be, not conquerors or destroyers, but catalysts. Wherever they went, change followed. Sometimes that change was uncomfortable, sometimes it was painful, but it was always, ultimately, growth. And then, in the year 10,000 of the Exile, a message arrived from the Milky Way. Part 5. The Return. The message was simple, broadcast on the same frequency the Conclave had used 10,000 years ago to deliver humanity's sentence of exile. To any surviving members of the species designated human, this is an emergency beacon from the Galactic Conclave of the Milky Way. We are under attack. Our defenses have failed. If you can hear this message, we beg for your assistance. Admiral James Chen, the latest in the long line of Chens who had led humanity since the Exodus, received the message in his private quarters aboard the new Prometheus, a vessel so advanced that it would have seemed like magic to his ancestors. He stared at the message for a long time. "Computer," he said finally, "what is the status of the Milky Way according to our long-range sensors?" Analyzing. The Milky Way galaxy is experiencing catastrophic disruption. Approximately 40% of the galaxy's stellar mass has been consumed or displaced. Energy signatures indicate the presence of technological activity on a scale that exceeds any known civilization by several orders of magnitude. Can you identify the source of this activity? Negative. The signatures do not match any cataloged species or technology. Preliminary analysis suggests the involvement of entities operating on principles we do not currently understand. James leaned back in his chair. 10,000 years ago, the Milky Way had sentenced humanity to death in the void. They had calculated a 0.003% chance of survival and bet against them. They had called humans vermin, invasive species, a Class 7 threat to galactic stability. And now they were begging for help. He could ignore the message. The Communion would support that decision. They had no obligation to the Milky Way, no treaties or agreements that bound them to assist. Humanity could continue its peaceful existence in Andromeda, growing and flourishing while their former persecutors faced whatever doom had found them. It would be justice, of a sort. James closed his eyes and thought about his ancestors. He thought about Helena Vasquez, standing alone in the conclave chamber while 400 civilizations voted to condemn her species. He thought about Marcus Chen, addressing the fleet as they departed into the void. He thought about all the generations between, who had lived and died and struggled and triumphed in the darkness between the stars. They had endured so much. They had sacrificed so much. And through it all, they had held on to one thing that their exilers had never understood: hope. Not just hope for survival, hope for something better. Hope that someday, somehow, humanity would prove worthy of the stars. Was abandoning the Milky Way to its fate worthy of the stars? James opened his eyes and made his decision. Computer, send a message to the Communion Council. Inform them that humanity will be mounting a relief expedition to the Milky Way galaxy. We will depart within one standard cycle. Acknowledged. Shall I also broadcast a response to the Milky Way? James considered the question carefully. 10,000 years was a long time. The species that had exiled humanity were likely all dead, replaced by descendants who had never met a human, who knew of the exile only as a historical footnote. The civilization that had cast them out no longer existed in any meaningful sense. But humanity still remembered. Yes, James said. Broadcast this response. This is Admiral James Chen of the Human Expeditionary Fleet. We received your distress call. We have not forgotten what your ancestors did to ours. We have not forgotten the sentence of exile, the predictions of extinction, the contempt with which our species was treated. We remember everything. Pause for effect, then continue. We're coming anyway. Try not to die before we get there. The fleet that departed Andromeda for the Milky Way was unlike anything the universe had ever seen. 1 million vessels, crewed by volunteers from across humanity's interstellar civilization. Ships that moved through dimensions rather than across them, capable of traveling between galaxies in hours rather than millennia. Weapon systems that could reshape matter at the atomic level. Defense systems that existed simultaneously in multiple states of reality. But the most remarkable thing about the fleet was not its technology. It was the composition of its crews. Alongside the 4 billion humans were volunteers from 17 different Andromedan species, beings who had heard the stories of humanity's exile and return, who had worked alongside humans for thousands of years, and who had come to understand something fundamental about this strange, stubborn, impossibly resilient species. Humans didn't give up. Humans didn't hold grudges when it mattered. And humans, when they committed to a cause, committed completely. If humanity was going to save the Milky Way, the Communion wanted to be part of it. The journey took 3 days. When the fleet emerged from the dimensional fold at the Milky Way's edge, the sensors immediately confirmed what the long-range scans had suggested. The galaxy was dying. Massive swaths of darkness cut across the spiral arms where stars should have been. Energy readings indicated consumption on an incomprehensible scale. Something was literally eating the galaxy's matter and converting it into a form of energy that the fleet's instruments couldn't categorize. And at the center of it all, where the galactic core should have been, there was only a vast absence, a wound in the fabric of space itself. "What the hell is that?" Admiral Chen breathed. Dr. Helena Wright, the fleet's chief science officer and direct descendant of the historian James Wright, who had documented the void crossing, shook her head slowly. "I don't know, but it's not natural. Nothing natural could do this. Could it be from another galaxy? Another species like us, exiled and returning? If so, they had a very different experience in the void than we did." The fleet pressed forward into the dying galaxy. They found survivors almost immediately, scattered pockets of refugees fleeing the advancing darkness, huddled in damaged ships and dying stations. The languages had changed over 10,000 years, but basic mathematics remained universal. Communication was established. The story they told was horrifying. It had started 2,000 years ago in the deep core of the galaxy, a research station conducting experiments into theoretical physics, something about accessing higher dimensions, manipulating the fundamental forces that governed reality. The experiment had succeeded beyond anyone's expectations. It had also opened a door that couldn't be closed. Something had come through. Entities from a realm that operated according to different rules. Beings for whom matter and energy were simply food. They had no goals, no culture, no psychology that the Milky Way's scientists could analyze. They simply consumed, spreading outward from the core in a wave of annihilation that nothing could stop. The Conclave had tried everything. They had deployed weapons that could shatter planets, technologies that had taken millions of years to develop. Nothing worked. The entities simply absorbed whatever was thrown at them, growing stronger with each assault. One by one, the great civilizations of the Milky Way had fallen. The Vorthok, the Selenari, the Kethra, species that had voted to exile humanity 10,000 years ago, were all extinct now. Their worlds consumed, their populations devoured, their entire histories erased as if they had never existed. "They came to us first," said one of the survivors, a Thalian whose species had once voted in humanity's favor. "They remembered what your people had said. When we return, you'll understand why. They thought you would come back as conquerors, seeking revenge. They thought you would save them because they hadn't been your enemies." Admiral Chen felt something twist in his chest. What happened to them? The same thing that happened to everyone else. The darkness doesn't care who voted for or against humanity. It consumes all equally. How many survivors are left? In the entire galaxy? Perhaps 50 million. We had trillions once. 50 million. From a galaxy that had contained trillions of sentient beings just 2,000 years ago. It was a genocide beyond anything humanity had ever imagined. But humanity had come to help, and humans didn't give up. "Dr. Wright," Admiral Chen said, "I need you to analyze those entities. Find out everything you can about how they work, what they're made of, what they want. The Communion Science Council is standing by to assist with any theoretical framework you need." "Admiral, the Milky Way's scientists spent 2,000 years trying to understand these things. What makes you think we can do better?" Chen smiled, the same stubborn, defiant smile that had been passed down through his family for 10,000 years. Because they tried to understand the entities by studying the entities. We're going to understand them by studying everything else. 5,000 years in the void, 5,000 years in Andromeda, we've learned things that no one in this galaxy has ever dreamed of. Somewhere in all that knowledge is an answer. We just have to find it. Part 6. The Reckoning. The answer, when it came, was almost laughably simple. The entities from beyond the dimensional rift were not truly alive, not in any sense that biological or even artificial life would recognize. They were patterns, self-sustaining configurations of energy that existed in the space between dimensions. They consumed matter and energy because that was simply what their patterns did, the same way a fire consumes oxygen without malice or intent. They couldn't be destroyed because they weren't really things that could be destroyed. They were more like mathematical equations that had somehow gained physical form. Abstract concepts made manifest in reality. But equations could be solved. Patterns could be disrupted. And concepts could be countered with other concepts. Dr. Helena Wright made the breakthrough in the third week of the crisis, after 72 hours without sleep and 17 failed theoretical models. The entities exist in a state of pure consumption, she explained to the assembled fleet commanders and communion observers. They take input and convert it to energy for their continued existence. But they can't refuse input. They have no filters, no discrimination. They absorb everything that comes into contact with them. That's why our weapons failed, noted a Meridex observer, one of the few survivors from that ancient trading race. They simply consumed the energy we directed at them. Exactly. But what if we gave them something they couldn't convert, something that was fundamentally incompatible with their pattern structure? Is that possible? Helena pulled up a holographic diagram, the dimensional mathematics she had developed over the past 3 weeks, building on theories that dated back to the Void Crossing and the discovery of the ancient star drive. The entities exist because the rift opened a pathway between their dimension and ours. They're sustained by the energy differential between the two realms, like a river flowing downhill. But if we could equalize that differential, if we could make our dimension appear identical to theirs at a fundamental level, the pathway would collapse, and the entities would collapse with it. How do we make our dimension appear identical to theirs? Helena smiled. The same smile her ancestor James Wright had worn when he completed his final historical entry. We don't. We just have to make the space around the rift appear that way. And thanks to the technology we reverse-engineered from the rogue planet, we have the ability to manipulate dimensional boundaries in ways that the entities can't anticipate or counter. Admiral Chen leaned forward. What do you need? 3 things. First, we need to get close to the rift, close enough to deploy the dimensional equalizers. Second, we need to buy time while the equalizers calibrate, at least 12 hours. Third, and this is the hard part, we need someone to enter the rift and activate the equalizers from inside. The dimensional interference is too strong to do it remotely. Enter the rift, Chen repeated. You mean go into whatever realm those things came from? Yes. And come back out again? Helena's pause was answer enough. Chen nodded slowly. I'll lead the team. Admiral, with respect, you're too valuable to... I'm not asking for permission, Doctor. I'm a Chen. We've been leading humanity since the Exodus. If this is how the story ends, then it ends with a Chen stepping through to the other side. He looked around at the assembled commanders, humans who had crossed the void, Andromedans who had joined their cause, and the handful of Milky Way survivors who had been given positions on the fleet. Besides, who better to enter an impossible realm and do an impossible thing? That's kind of our specialty. No one argued. The battle for the Milky Way's core was the largest engagement in human history. 1 million ships against an enemy that was everywhere and nowhere, that couldn't be destroyed by conventional means, but could certainly destroy anything it touched. The fleet's job was simple in concept and almost impossible in execution. Protect the dimensional equalizers long enough for them to calibrate, and protect Admiral Chen's team long enough for them to enter the rift. The entities responded to the fleet's presence immediately. They emerged from the darkness in waves, formless masses of consuming energy that bent light around them like living black holes. Wherever they touched a ship, the ship simply ceased to exist, its matter and energy absorbed into the entity's endless hunger. But humanity had not come unprepared. The weapons they deployed were not designed to destroy the entities, but to delay them. Dimensional barriers that temporarily sealed them off from local space. Energy pulses tuned to frequencies that disrupted their pattern coherence for crucial seconds. Matter sacrificed specifically to distract them, giving other ships time to maneuver. It was a delaying action on a galactic scale, and slowly, painfully, with losses that would have broken any lesser species, it worked. Admiral James Chen's shuttle approached the rift with an escort of the fleet's fastest ships. One by one, the escorts were consumed, their crews sacrificing themselves to buy even a few more seconds of progress. By the time the shuttle reached the rift's event horizon, it was alone. Inside the shuttle were 11 people: James Chen, Helena Wright, and 9 volunteers who had each been selected for their unique skills and their willingness to die for something greater than themselves. "Admiral," Helena said, as the rift's impossible geometry filled their view screen, "I want you to know something." "Make it quick, Doctor. We're about to step into another dimension." "I reviewed my ancestor's writings last night, the last thing he wrote before we arrived in Andromeda." "And?" "He said, 'We are humanity, the species that cannot be broken, only refined. And we are finally coming home. I thought you should know that we're still proving him right." Chen smiled. "Then, let's make sure the story continues." The shuttle entered the rift. What lay beyond was indescribable. Not because it was too horrible to put into words, though it was certainly that, but because the human brain, even a brain enhanced by 5,000 years of genetic refinement, was not equipped to process sensory input from a dimension with different fundamental laws. Colors that didn't exist, sounds that moved in impossible directions, gravity that pulled in multiple directions simultaneously, time that flowed backward and forward and sideways all at once. The team moved through this madness with the single-minded determination that had carried their ancestors through the void. They didn't try to understand their surroundings. They didn't try to make sense of what they were experiencing. They simply moved forward, following the coordinates that Helena's equations had provided. One by one, team members fell. Some were consumed by the entities that swarmed through this realm like fish through water. Others simply vanished, their minds unable to maintain coherent existence in a place where coherence was not the default state. By the time they reached the deployment point, only 3 remained: James Chen, Helena Wright, and a young engineer named Marcus Okafor, whose family had served alongside the Chens since the very beginning. "This is it," Helena said, her voice barely audible over the impossible sounds that surrounded them. "The center of the rift. If we activate the equalizers here, it should propagate outward and seal the entire breach." "Should?" Marcus asked. "The math says it will work, but the math was done in our dimension. Here, math might work differently." Chen nodded. "Then we'd better hope our math is more stubborn than theirs." He activated the equalizers. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, the impossible colors began to fade, replaced by something that looked almost like normal space. The sounds quieted, the gravity stabilized. And the entities screamed. It was not a physical sound. The entities had no mouths, no lungs, no vocal cords. But the pattern of their existence was being disrupted. And somewhere in the fundamental structure of the universe, that disruption manifested as something very much like agony. "It's working," Helena breathed. "The dimensional differential is equalizing. The rift is—" She never finished the sentence. A final surge of entities, desperate and dying, swept through the closing breach. Helena was consumed in an instant, her last expression one of triumph rather than fear. Marcus grabbed Chen's arm. "Admiral, we need to go! The rift is closing!" Chen looked at the narrowing breach, at the billions of entities dying around them, at the dimension that was collapsing into mathematical impossibility. He thought about his ancestors, about the Chen who had led the fleet into the void, about all the generations who had carried the burden of leadership through impossible circumstances. "You," he said to Marcus. "Tell them what happened here. Tell them we won." "Admiral, that's an order, Okafor. The first one I've ever given that actually mattered." Marcus hesitated for a single agonizing moment. Then he turned and ran toward the closing breach, throwing himself through just before it sealed shut forever. Admiral James Chen watched him go. Then he turned to face the collapsing dimension, the dying entities, and the end of everything he had ever known. He smiled. "We made it home," he said to no one in particular. "We really made it home." The rift closed. The dimension collapsed. And James Chen, last of the great line of Chens, ceased to exist in any form that the universe could recognize. But his people survived. Epilogue: The Legacy. 1 year after the closing of the rift. The Milky Way was scarred but healing. 40% of the galaxy's stellar mass had been consumed, and it would take millions of years for new stars to form in the empty spaces. But the consumption had stopped. The darkness was gone. The surviving 50 million inhabitants of the galaxy could finally begin to rebuild. They were not alone. Humanity stayed. Despite everything the Milky Way had done to them, despite 10,000 years of exile and a sentence of extinction, humans chose to remain and help rebuild. Volunteers from Andromeda continued to arrive, bringing resources and expertise and the simple willingness to work alongside species who had once been strangers. The new Galactic Conclave, smaller, humbler, and infinitely more grateful, met for the first time in a newly constructed station orbiting the site of the old Nexus Prime. Representatives of the surviving species sat alongside human ambassadors and Andromedan observers. The first order of business was a formal apology. High Arbiter Zelfin, a Thalian who had inherited his position from ancestors who had voted to save humanity 10,000 years ago, delivered the statement on behalf of the entire galaxy. To the people of humanity, we offer our deepest and most sincere apologies for the actions of our predecessors. You were judged unfairly, sentenced unjustly, and cast into the void with the expectation that you would die. Instead, you survived. You flourished. And when we needed you most, you returned to save us. We can never repay this debt. We can only promise to remember it and to build a future worthy of your sacrifice. Ambassador Sarah Chen, Marcus Okafor's granddaughter, who had taken the Chen name in honor of the family that had led humanity for so long, responded on behalf of her species. "We accept your apology," she said, "not because we have forgotten what happened, but because we have learned that carrying anger across generations serves no one. Our ancestors were exiled because you feared what they might become. Your fear was justified. We have become something beyond anything your predecessors could have imagined. But we have also become something they could never have predicted. We have become your friends." She paused, looking around the chamber at the representatives of species that had once tried to destroy humanity. Species that had ignored the destruction, and species that had fought alongside humans in the battle for the core. Admiral James Chen gave his life to save this galaxy. He did it not for revenge, not for glory, and not because he expected gratitude. He did it because that's who we are. Humanity doesn't give up on people, even people who gave up on us. We don't abandon those in need, even those who abandoned us. And we don't stop hoping for a better future, even when the present seems hopeless. She straightened her uniform, the same design that admirals of the Chen line had worn since the Exodus, preserved and passed down through 10,000 years of history. The exile is over. The past is past. What matters now is what we build together. And if humanity has learned anything in our journey across the void and back, it's this: The universe is vast and strange and sometimes terrifying, but it's also full of possibilities. Let's explore them together. The chamber erupted in applause, a sound that would have seemed impossible just a year ago, when the galaxy was dying and hope was a fading memory. Outside the station, the stars of the Milky Way shone with the same light that had guided humanity since the very beginning. Some of those stars were new, born from the aftermath of the crisis. Others were ancient, witnesses to billions of years of galactic history. And among them, barely visible even to enhanced eyes, was the faint smudge of light that was the Andromeda Galaxy, the place where humanity had found refuge, and the bridge that now connected two galaxies in a partnership that would last for eons to come. Humanity had been exiled from the galaxy. They had crossed the void, survived the impossible, and built a civilization among alien stars. And when the time came, they had returned to save the very species that had tried to destroy them. Not because they had to, because that was who they were. The species that could not be broken. The people who never gave up. The civilization that turned exile into evolution, and evolution into transcendence. They had come home, and this time they were here to stay. For James Chen, Helena Wright, and the countless others who gave their lives in the void and the battle for the core, their sacrifice is remembered. Their legacy endures. Humanity remembers. Humanity endures. Humanity prevails. The end.